The screen flickered, casting a pale glow across the darkened room as Tom Bennett froze, his hand trembling over the mouse. He hadn't meant to snoop, honest to God. He was just trying to fix his son's laptop, but the folder labeled Private stared back at him, its contents spilling open like a confession he wasn't ready to hear. Gay videos, explicit and unapologetic, filled the screen, each thumbnail a dagger to the heart of a man raised on small-town Kentucky values. Tom's breath hitched. His son, Elliot, was 17, a high school senior with a quarterback's build and a preacher's charm. How could this be? He slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. It was a crisp autumn evening in Bardstown, Kentucky, where the air smelled of bourbon barrels and fading summer. The Bennett family lived in a modest two-story home on Maple Street, the kind of place where neighbors waved and church bells rang every Sunday. Tom, a mechanic with calloused hands and a stoic demeanor, had built a life here with his wife, Sarah, and their two kids, Elliot and Lily. He'd always seen Elliot as his pride captain of the football team, honor roll student, the boy who'd follow in his footsteps. But now, as he sat in Elliot's room, the weight of what he'd found threatened to unravel everything. Elliot was at football practice, oblivious to the storm brewing at home. He'd always been careful, or so he thought, keeping his truth buried deep under layers of passwords and late-night browsing. But the laptop had been sluggish, and he'd asked his dad to take a look. A careless mistake. Now, as he ran drills under the stadium lights, his heart raced not from the sprints, but from a secret he'd guarded since he was 13. A secret named Caleb. Caleb Monroe was the opposite of Elliot in every way. Where Elliot was broad-shouldered and golden-haired, Caleb was lean, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to see through people. He was the new kid at Bardstown High, a transfer from Chicago with a reputation for trouble and a smirk that drove teachers crazy. But to Elliot, Caleb was a spark in the monotony of small-town life, a boy who made his pulse quicken with every stolen glance in the hallways. Their story began 3 months ago, in the back of the school library, where Caleb caught Elliot staring at him over a stack of history books. "You gonna keep pretending you're reading that?" Caleb had teased, his voice low and playful. Elliot's face burned, but he didn't look away. That moment marked the start of something dangerous, a connection that grew in secret, in late-night texts and clandestine meetings at the old diner on Route 62. Tom, meanwhile, sat frozen in Elliot's room, the laptop still closed, but its secrets screaming in his mind. He thought of his own father, a man who'd preached fire and brimstone, who'd called people like that an abomination. Tom wasn't like that didn't hate anyone, but this was his son, his blood. How could Elliot be something so foreign? He stood, pacing, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. He needed to talk to Sarah. She'd know what to do. She always did. Sarah Bennett was the heart of the family, a schoolteacher with a laugh that could light up a room. She was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped carrots for dinner, when Tom stumbled in, his face pale. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "we need to talk about Elliot." Her knife paused mid-chop, her eyes narrowing with a mother's instinct. "What's wrong?" she asked, already bracing for the worst. Tom hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. "How do you tell your wife that your son might not be who you thought?" "I found something on his computer," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Videos. Gay videos." Sarah's knife clattered to the counter. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then she spoke, her voice steady but laced with fear. "What are you saying, Tom?" I'm saying our boys got secrets, Tom replied, his hands clenched into fists. And I don't know what to do about it. Sarah's face softened, but her eyes were distant, as if she were piecing together a puzzle she'd half suspected for years. She'd seen the way Elliot lit up around Caleb, the way his smiles lingered a little too long. But she'd prayed it was just a phase, a teenage confusion that would pass. Now, the truth was undeniable. Elliot came home an hour later, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his hair damp from a post-practice shower. The house felt different the moment he stepped inside, too quiet, too heavy. His parents were at the kitchen table, their faces grim. Elliot, Tom said, his voice like gravel. Sit down. Elliot's stomach dropped. He knew that tone. It was the same one his dad used when Lily got caught sneaking out or when the shop was behind on bills. But this felt bigger, scarier. He sat, his hands gripping the edge of the chair, and met his father's gaze. What's going on? He asked, though a part of him already knew. Tom didn't waste words. I saw what's on your computer, he said, each syllable sharp and deliberate. Elliot's heart stopped. He wanted to run, to disappear, but his legs felt like lead. Dad, he started, but Tom cut him off. Don't lie to me, Elliot. Are you gay? The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Sarah reached for Elliot's hand, but he pulled away, his eyes darting between his parents. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, rehearsed the words in his head, but now they failed him. I don't know, he whispered, his voice breaking. It was a lie, and they all knew it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Tom leaned forward, his jaw tight. You don't know? He repeated, his voice rising. You don't know what those videos mean. You don't know why you've been sneaking around with that Monroe kid. Elliot flinched at Caleb's name, his secret laid bare. This isn't you, Elliot, Tom continued, his voice softer now, almost pleading. This isn't who we raised you to be. Elliot's chest tightened, a mix of anger and shame boiling inside him. You don't know who I am, he shot back, standing so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You never have. Before his parents could respond, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the screen door slamming behind him. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay in that house. The night air was cold, biting at his skin as he walked, his breath visible in the moonlight. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Caleb. You okay? The text read. Elliot's fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't reply. Not yet. He needed to think, to breathe, to figure out how to face a truth that could break his family apart. Elliot's boots crunched against the gravel as he walked the empty streets of Bardstown, the town's quiet beauty now a suffocating cage. The diner on Route 62 glowed in the distance, its neon sign flickering like a beacon. Caleb was there, waiting in their usual booth, his dark hair falling over his eyes as he sipped a milkshake, unaware of the chaos unraveling in Elliot's world. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and fried onions, the jukebox playing an old Springsteen tune. Caleb looked up as Elliot slid into the booth, his face pale and his eyes red. Jesus, what happened? Caleb asked, leaning forward, his voice thick with concern. Elliot didn't answer right away. He just stared at the table, tracing the cracks in the formica, trying to find words for the storm inside him. My dad found the videos, Elliot said finally, his voice barely audible. Caleb's eyes widened, his hand reaching instinctively for Elliot's. But he stopped short, glancing around the half-empty diner. What did he say? Caleb asked, his tone cautious but urgent. Elliot recounted the confrontation, every word his father spoke cutting deeper as he repeated them. He thinks I'm wrong. Like I'm someone he doesn't even know. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. You're not wrong, Elle. You're you. And that's enough. His words were a lifeline, but Elliot couldn't grab hold not yet. He felt like he was drowning, caught between the boy he loved and the family he couldn't bear to lose. Back at the Bennett house, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Tom paced the living room, his anger giving way to confusion. I just don't get it, Sarah, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. How did we miss this? How did we not see it? Sarah sighed, her voice steady but tired. Maybe we didn't want to see it, Tom. Maybe we were too busy pretending everything was perfect. She thought of the small signs she'd ignored Elliot's late-night phone calls, the way he'd blush when Caleb's name came up, the quiet distance that had grown between him and his parents. She'd chalked it up to teenage rebellion, but now she saw it for what it was, her son hiding who he loved to protect himself. Tom stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping. What do we do now? Kick him out. Send him to some camp to fix him. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare say that, Tom Bennett. He's our son, not some broken machine. Her words hit him like a slap, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his own fear. Not fear of Elliot, but fear of losing him. At the diner, Elliot and Caleb talked until the waitress started giving them pointed looks. Caleb reached for Elliot's hand again, this time not pulling back. You don't have to go through this alone, he said, his voice fierce with conviction. I'm here. Whatever happens. Elliot wanted to believe him, but the thought of facing his parents again made his stomach churn. What if they hate me? He whispered. Caleb squeezed his hand. They won't. They might not get it, but they won't hate you. Elliot wasn't so sure. He thought of his dad's face, the disappointment etched into every line. He thought of his mom's tears, the way she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. But Caleb's hand in his felt like an anchor, grounding him in a world that was spinning out of control. The next morning, Elliot returned home, his heart pounding as he opened the front door. The house was quiet, but he could hear his parents' voices in the kitchen. He took a deep breath and walked in, ready to face whatever came next. Sarah was at the stove, making pancakes, but her movements were slow, mechanical. Tom sat at the table, his coffee untouched. Elliot, Sarah said, turning to face him. Her voice was soft, but there was a strength in it that made his chest ache. We need to talk. All of us. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. He sat across from his dad, who wouldn't meet his eyes. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the sizzle of batter on the griddle. I'm sorry, Elliot said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I didn't want you to find out like that. I didn't want you to find out at all. Sarah reached for his hand, and this time he let her take it. You don't have to apologize for who you are, she said, her voice trembling. But you should have told us. We're your family. Tom finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I don't understand it, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to wrap my head around this. But I know I don't want to lose you, Elliot. It wasn't acceptance not yet, but it was a start, a crack in the wall that had sprung up between them. Elliot felt tears prick his eyes, but he held them back. I'm still me, he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. I'm still your son. For the first time since the night before, He saw a flicker of the dad he'd always known, the one who'd taught him to throw a spiral, who'd cheered louder than anyone at his games. The conversation didn't fix everything. There were still questions, still fears, still a long road ahead. But as they sat there, the three of them, something shifted. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk. Elliot moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to stir the fragile peace. Sarah tried to bridge the gap, asking gentle questions about Caleb, but Tom remained a fortress of silence, his discomfort palpable. At school, Elliot and Caleb kept their distance in public, their connection confined to stolen moments behind the bleachers or late-night drives to nowhere. But the weight of secrecy was crushing, and Elliot felt it in every glance, every whispered rumor that followed him down the halls. Bardstown wasn't a place where differences were celebrated. The town's heartbeat was its church, its football team, its unspoken rules about what was normal. Elliot had always fit that mold until now. Whispers spread like wildfire after a teammate caught him and Caleb too close in the locker room, their hands brushing for a split second too long. By lunch, the word fag was scrawled on Elliot's locker in black marker, sharp and ugly against the metal. Caleb found him there, staring at the word like it was a wound. "Ignore it," Caleb said, his voice tight with anger. "They're just idiots." But Elliot couldn't ignore it. The word felt like a brand, marking him as an outsider in the only home he'd ever known. He wanted to fight, to scream, but instead he just nodded, letting Caleb pull him away. At home, things weren't much better. Tom had started going to the garage early and staying late, avoiding the conversations Sarah kept pushing for. One night, she cornered him in the living room, her voice low but firm. "You can't keep pretending this isn't happening, Tom. He's our son, and he's hurting." Tom rubbed his face, exhaustion etched into his features. "I'm trying, Sarah. I don't know how to be okay with this." Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his arm. "You don't have to be okay with it right away. But you have to try. For him." Tom nodded, but his eyes were distant, haunted by memories of his own father's rigid beliefs. He didn't want to be that man, but unlearning a lifetime of lessons was like pulling teeth. Elliot, meanwhile, was grappling with his own demons. He loved Caleb God. He loved him, but the cost of that love was becoming clearer every day. At school, his teammates started freezing him out, their camaraderie replaced by cold shoulders and sly digs. Even his best friend, Jake, who'd been like a brother since kindergarten, started keeping his distance. "It's not personal, man," Jake muttered one day in the cafeteria, his eyes on his tray. "It's just weird." The rejection stung, but it was nothing compared to the fear that gripped Elliot when he thought of his future. Would he have to leave Bardstown to be himself? Would his family ever truly accept him? He poured these fears into late-night talks with Caleb, who listened with a quiet intensity that made Elliot feel seen in a way he never had before. One evening, Caleb took him to a clearing in the woods outside town, a place they'd found during one of their drives. The stars were bright, the air cool, and for a moment, it was just them, no judgment, no secrets. Caleb pulled Elliot close, their foreheads touching. "We could leave," Caleb said, his voice a whisper against the night. "After graduation. Go somewhere nobody cares who we love." Elliot's heart ached at the thought. Leaving meant giving up his family, his home, the life he'd always known. But staying felt like a slow death, a life of hiding who he was. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he admitted, his voice breaking. Caleb kissed him, soft and steady, a promise that they'd face whatever came together. Back at home, Sarah was digging into her own past, searching for answers. She remembered her brother, Daniel, who'd left Bardstown years ago after a fight with their parents. He'd been different, too quietly, subtly different, and the town had chewed him up for it. She hadn't understood then, but now, with Elliot's truth staring her in the face, she wondered if Daniel had been like her son. She found his number in an old address book and dialed, her heart pounding. "Daniel," she said when he answered, her voice trembling. "It's Sarah. I need to talk to you about Elliot." On the other end, Daniel was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "I had a feeling this call was coming," he said, his voice heavy with a truth he'd carried for years. Sarah's conversation with Daniel cracked open a door she hadn't known was locked. He told her about his own life, how he'd left Bardstown at 19, unable to live under the weight of their parents' expectations. "I'm gay, Sarah," he said, the words simple but heavy. "I couldn't stay in a place that wouldn't let me be me." Sarah listened, her heart breaking for the brother she'd lost to distance and silence, and for the son she was determined not to lose the same way. She didn't tell Tom about the call right away. He was still wrestling with his own feelings, spending long hours at the garage, where the hum of engines drowned out his thoughts. But one night, as they lay in bed, Sarah spoke. "Tom, I talked to Daniel. He's gay. And he left because he felt like he had no choice." Tom turned to her, his face shadowed in the dark. "Why didn't he tell us?" he asked, his voice raw. Sarah sighed. "Because he didn't think we'd understand. And I'm scared Elliot feels the same way." The words hit Tom like a punch. He thought of Elliot's face that night in the kitchen, the fear in his eyes, the way he'd said, "You don't know who I am." Tom had spent his life trying to be a good father, but now he wondered if he'd failed his son in the ways that mattered most. At school, the tension was escalating. The word on Elliot's locker had been scrubbed away, but the damage was done. Rumors swirled, and a group of teammates cornered him after practice, their words sharp and cruel. "You think you can just prance around with your boyfriend and still be one of us?" One of them sneered. Elliot stood his ground, his fists clenched, but he didn't fight back. Not with his hands. "I'm still the same guy who's carried this team all season," he said, his voice steady. "If you can't handle who I love, that's your problem." The confrontation didn't end there. That night, someone slashed the tires on Elliot's truck, leaving a note under the wiper, "Leave." Caleb was furious when he saw it, ready to hunt down whoever was responsible, but Elliot stopped him. "It's not worth it," he said, though his voice shook. "They want me to break. I won't." Caleb pulled him into a hug, right there in the school parking lot, not caring who saw. "You're stronger than they'll ever be," he whispered. Elliot clung to him, drawing strength from the boy who'd become his safe harbor in a storm. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Sarah, meanwhile, was making plans. She invited Daniel to visit, hoping his presence would help Tom see that love didn't have to mean loss. When Daniel arrived, he looked different, older, of course, but also lighter, like a man who'd found peace after years of running. He hugged Sarah tightly, then turned to Tom, who stood stiffly in the doorway. "Good to see you, Tom," Daniel said, his voice warm but cautious. Tom nodded, his throat tight. "You too." Over dinner, Daniel shared stories of his life in Seattle, where he lived with his partner, Mark, and worked as an artist. Elliot listened, wide-eyed, seeing a glimpse of a future he hadn't dared imagine. But Tom was quiet, his fork moving mechanically. After dinner, he and Daniel sat on the porch, the night air thick with unspoken words. "I didn't leave because of you," Daniel said finally. "I left because I couldn't breathe here. But Elliot's braver than I was. He's trying to stay." Tom stared at the ground, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be his dad and accept this." Daniel's eyes softened. "You start by listening. Really listening." The next day, Elliot came home to find his uncle in the living room, a sight so unexpected it stopped him in his tracks. "Uncle Dan," he said, his voice uncertain. Daniel smiled, standing to hug him. "Hey, kid. I hear you've been stirring things up." Elliot laughed, a small, nervous sound, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope. That night, Tom knocked on Elliot's door, something he hadn't done since the laptop incident. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than Elliot had ever heard it. Elliot nodded, bracing himself. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped like he was praying. "I don't understand everything you're going through," he said. "But I'm trying. And I'm not going anywhere." Elliot's eyes stung, but he didn't look away. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't everything he wanted, but it was more than he'd expected. For now, it was enough to keep him holding on. Spring came to Bardstown, painting the hills green and softening the edges of winter's wounds. Elliot and Caleb stood side by side at prom, their tuxes sharp, their hands clasped defiantly as they walked into the gym. Whispers followed, but so did a few nods of respect from classmates who'd seen Elliot's courage in the face of cruelty. He wasn't the quarterback anymore. His teammates had voted him out as captain, but he was something better, himself, unapologetically. Tom and Sarah were there, too, standing awkwardly among the other parents, their camera flashing as they captured their son's smile. Tom had spent months wrestling with his fears, talking to Daniel, reading books Sarah slipped onto his nightstand, even attending a PFLAG meeting in Louisville. He wasn't perfect. He still flinched at the sight of Elliot and Caleb together, but he was learning. And that was enough for now. The real turning point came weeks later, at a town hall meeting where a local pastor proposed a ban on public displays of homosexuality in Bardstown. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Elliot and Caleb sat in the back, their hands linked under the table, their hearts pounding. Sarah was the first to stand, her voice clear and unwavering. "My son is gay," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "And he's braver than anyone in this room for living his truth in a town that makes it so hard. You don't get to decide who he loves." The room erupted, some in boos, others in applause. Then, to everyone's shock, Tom stood. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. "I didn't get it at first," he said. "I thought I'd failed as a father. But the only failure would be letting my son feel like he's less than because of who he is. I'm proud of him. And I'll fight for him." Elliot's breath caught, tears streaming down his face as he watched his father, his stoic, small-town father, stand up for him in a way he'd never imagined. Caleb squeezed his hand, his own eyes wet. The proposal didn't pass, but the moment wasn't about policy. It was about a family finding its way back to each other. Graduation came, and Elliot walked across the stage with his head high, Caleb cheering louder than anyone in the crowd. They decided to stay in Kentucky for college, choosing a school in Lexington where they could be together openly. It wasn't Seattle or Chicago, but it was a start, a place to build a life without hiding. The summer before they left, the Bennetts hosted a barbecue, inviting Daniel and Mark, Caleb's parents, and even a few neighbors who'd come around. The backyard was filled with laughter, the smell of grilled burgers, and the hum of acceptance, fragile but growing. Tom pulled Elliot aside as the sun set, his hand heavy on his son's shoulder. "I'm still learning," he said, his voice thick. "But I love you, Elliot. Always will." Elliot hugged him, the kind of hug that bridged years of silence and misunderstanding. "I love you too, Dad," he said, and for the first time, he felt like his father saw him, not the quarterback, not the perfect son, but Elliot, whole and true. As the stars came out, Elliot and Caleb sat on the porch swing, their fingers intertwined. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more whispers, more fights, more moments of doubt. But they had each other, and they had a family that was trying, imperfectly but earnestly, to love them as they were. In the end, the truth Tom unearthed on that laptop didn't shatter the Bennetts, it reshaped them. It forced them to confront their fears, their past, and their love for each other. And in that messy, beautiful process, they found something stronger than they'd ever had before, a family built on honesty, courage, and the unshakable belief that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for.